This is a quick tour of the current state of the Rubric module for Drupal 7. So Rubric has been a module that I've had in my portfolio for a long time, but really haven't done anything with, and finally we're getting back to it. So this will be where this module is at this time, as well as show off a couple other projects I found along the way I thought were neat. One being text formatter, one being field collection tab formatter, which I use the base rubric on a lot. Equal heights is a jQuery plugin. I'll show how that's used. And the iframe, which is one of my own. So this is kind of all of those playing together with field collection and some other things. So what we've got here is a Drupal managed rubric. It's a content type. So when you install rubric in the rubric feature, you'll get a rather sophisticated content type broken into a series of nested field collections. So to see what the structure is of those field collections, let's see, we go pretty deep down here. We've got categories and criteria and levels, each nesting downward so that you can build the structure you see on the page. Included in the rubric package, there's a field formatter that I mentioned is based off of field collection tabs called Rubric Row that allows you to define the parts of the interface that get rendered and what fields those map to. Because this is using just Drupal scaffolding, if you will, in terms of content types, you should be able to modify the rubric feature to add whatever fields you want and output them any way you want. It's using all kinds of theme functions and field formatters and things that are standard Drupal convention for field rendering. So hopefully you can make this rubric look however you want. Here's what the default state is that we've got. So I have an example rubric, and you can see the first level item being category, and we've got personal narrative and artwork as our two categories. This is using field collection tabs to render this way. Our second level, we've got, for criteria, we have content writing and spelling. This is, again, another field collection. And then each one of these field collections, which is a field collection in here and a field collection, it gets a little circular, stamps out as the lowest level type, which is level, which has this type of a layout to it. So you can see it's a fairly clean interface for utilizing a rubric and assessing someone. Right now, I'm working on just the scaffolding of the rubric, presentation of a rubric. Later on, it will become more of an interface for grading and assessing people. But you can see we can have different style, very different layouts are varied here. So notice a simple thing. We don't have any point values associated with these, but we do have potential point ranges. So potential point ranges find their way across the top, point values across the bottom, but there's no points associated with these ones, so they're not there. There are points associated with these, so they show up. And there's no point ranges associated with these, and since points can be overridden down the road, we just put what that is here. Under personal narrative, you'll see the full thing. So we've got a couple of our fields filled in to do these nice ordered lists. We've got the title, we've got the point range, and we've got our point values at the bottom. You also notice that this is 100% width regardless of the number of columns that you specify. Some of these are 3, some are 4. It has support all the way up to 10. This is done by a class being applied dynamically to the elements. And so you'll see we have rubric level, rubric 0, so that we can identify a specific delta within this set. And then if we look at this upper level here we go. We've got rubric level split 4. So at the time of rendering, when Drupal goes to present this, it's going to actually look at the number of levels that are in that field collection and then use that information to create a class, and that class name is defined in the CSS in such a way. Let's look at what this form looks like. Now, this is just the way it's out of the box with field collections and things. Still need to do some work on an actual interface to build these, but you can actually see it step down. So each one of these is a field collection. So we have categories. There's category 1. Category 1 is personal narrative. You can fill in some details to describe whatever it is. Within there, we then have criteria. And in this case, criteria is content writing. Again, you can have a detailed description of why you need to do stuff with writing. right, so that we can get that on the rubric interface. And then we have our levels down here. So each one of these levels that is, that kind of little card is actually made up of other fields. So there's the title, in this case, excellent. There's a point value, which is 12. We have some rationale as to why you received this level of assessment. And then we have some suggested remediation. So it's two separate lists. So if you imagine having several reasons why someone received a level, and if it's not perfect, this one is perfect. Let's use a different example here. For example, level 2, you did adequate. The remediation becomes how you could actually do better. This is sample data based off of a real rubric. This is not a real rubric fully, because I can't spell very well. You can see we put in the point range, which is 2 values. If they're so entered, then they are. And none of this information actually has to be entered, as in the case of absent, which has 0 points as its default, meaning that you didn't attend a lecture or something. So that's the current state of the rubric tool in terms of being able to present a rubric on the page. It's meeting that purpose now. Let's see it playing with something called text list formatter. So this is a pretty nice, easy pickup here. These are formatted based on text list formatter. And the way that you format a field based on text list formatting is, I'll go into my levels, so I can manage display. And I have an actual field here. Now by default, this would just say default. All right, so it will just render those items all next to each other, encapsulated in divs. If you do the list type, which is one that you get with the text list formatter, then in the options you can select whether it's comma separated, HTML list, of those two types. You can add classes right here. So this is a very simple way to get those ordered as a list by just downloading a module, basically. So that was a nice gain as far as that. I could do an ordered versus non-ordered list. Another project at work here is, if we go responsive with this, you see this is a responsive rubric, and then once we hit about 720, there we go. You see we actually collapse it over into a different layout. So if we were on a phone and say we were reviewing what the criteria were, we could scroll down and give ourselves enough space to be able to see what's going on. There's really no other way to present a rubric to a phone. So we've got that in place. Another nice project, you'll notice these are all very uniform height. This is provided by the Equal Heights jQuery plugin. And once you install Equal Heights, it has a library you have to download, but you go to Development and then Equal Heights. And this is an example of how this is configured for the rubric tool. You can select a tag or element to target, and you can even put in media queries, so it won't apply this JavaScript once we hit the 720 snap point, which is pretty cool. You can select what the minimum height is for all of the items you're targeting, and as well as a maximum height, and what how to treat overflow. And then what it does is, because it's kind of difficult in CSS to actually give things an appropriate height, the one that would be problematic is this first one with rationale. I have a lot of different statements that stack. Without a jQuery plugin looking at the size of this item and then making sure they're all the same height, because if they weren't all the same height, it wouldn't look the right way. These borders wouldn't flow down, because this isn't a table, it's just a series of divs. What it does is it looks at the height of all of the items that you've selected and then says, this is the height that would fit the content of the biggest one, and then it applies it to the others. I believe it was created mostly for responsive design of like blocks and things on a newspaper site, but it serves this purpose pretty well here. The last project we can show very quickly is entity iframe. So I've got this item here. We want to embed this item in one of our course pages. And so using some CIS magic, if you will, it's a project that I work on. We've got this short code. So the other site has generated a short code basically saying I'd like to view this item via an iframe. And then what entity iframe does is it can load up that node exactly as it's presented in this interface, but wipe all the theme cruft away. And so we get the ability to embed a theme from somewhere else into our site. And again, it's not going to be perfect once you hit a mobile snap point. Most likely we would pop this rubric open in a new window or take you to the site that it's located, but you can see how you'd actually be able to embed these items. One aspect of Entity iframe at work here is the notion of cross-domain dynamic size allocation. So to sound slightly less cryptic than that description, there's Entity iframe provider and consumer. And what it does is it allows your two sites to talk to each other, because as you can see here, these aren't the same domain. So iframe communication is not allowed when it's not against the same browser. The document object model isn't actually allowed to walk into this and see what's in it, if you will. So it can use URLs that are basically reassigning URLs and things. And it keeps passing information downward, dynamically embeds a frame that is pointing back to itself, if you will. So what the end result is I'll scroll down, you can see in place. So this is fairly large, right? If I refresh the page, you'll see it actually loads only at like 200 or so pixels high, and then it passes a message down the page asking the page, hey, how tall are you? And then it passes it forward again in order to change its height dynamically. So hopefully this will load in place here. You can see it happen real quick. Won't let me do it. When I have this on here. But we could inspect this again, and you'll see that it's passed a hashtag H equals 1664, and so it's kind of this trick that you can pass messages through hashtags and things in the URL, and so that's how it actually resizes itself on demand. Because you'll notice it says that it's only height and width of 1.1 here, and this initial height starts at 300. So we could actually set this to 0 or something. We've done that on some sites to give the effect of an animated item loading on the page. So that's the current state of the rubric tool. There's a lot more work to be done with it. We're going to be adding in different levels of different forms of assessment, in which you could use this rubric and apply it to another node so that you could have a self-assessment, the review of work, because this will be within a larger system called the Elms collaborative learning environment, or that you could do a peer evaluation, kind of evaluate your peers. So looking at potentially making that more of like a rubric entity type of relationship, so that you could relate two items together, a rubric, which is in this case a node, to some other entity, so that you're assessing that entity in some way, which would open up the potential for files, users, other nodes, groups of content, whatever you want that makes sense.